So we welcome today to the WorkPro Files studio, Julie Mills, who's the CEO of ITCRA. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Luke.
And today we'll be discussing with Julie a recent defining of the future forums that have taken place in April and June of this year in Melbourne and Sydney, where Julie will give us a summary as to what was said, what was discussed, the sort of feedback, and the drivers behind the discussion. Julie, do you want to tell us all about what went on in those forums?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, and thanks for the opportunity, but first of all, it's really important to understand where these forums initiated from. One of the things that ITCRA has in its members survey was that the membership clearly wanted ITCRA to be responsive to things in the marketplace that were affecting the way they saw themselves, the way their businesses operated. And one of the things that's happened over the last 12 months in Australia has been the constant array of labour hire inquiries. And the challenge under those labour hire inquiries was the fact that all forms of work were being captured under that one heading of labour hire. And not only do the people who recruit in the white-collar professional staffing sector not see themselves as labour hire, nor do the people who actually work in that space. And the challenge around this has been around the language. And so one of the things that we want to do is really distinguish the definitions of labour hire from other forms of contracting, specifically in those third-party relationships where contractors have responsibility for a large number of their own actions and, in fact, want to take responsibility for their own work. And so the first thing that we did when we actually had these conversations through email and online was we discovered that the number of ways that people describe themselves as contractors and the number of ways that the industry, the recruitment industry in that space describes the people that engage with them were as many and varied as you and I have had hot lunches. And so that was the first risk. You're very much exposed to risk if you actually don't know who you are or what you are called. And this has just been an evolution because the nature of work and the changing way that people want to engage in work has meant that for a marketing point of difference, you might call yourself, Luke, a contractor or a flexi worker, or you might call yourself an independent contractor, but not really understand what that means in terms of the legislation, in terms of your insurance obligations, your obligations to anyone that you might subcontract to or whatever, because the language has just evolved and flowered over the last 15 years, but there's never really been a concentrated look at what it means. The federal government 3 or 4 iterations ago had a go with the Independent Contractors Act, but you can read that entire act, which is hundreds of pages, and nowhere is there a definition.
Yep.
Now, the one thing that ITCRA loves and that I particularly love is a challenge. And so what we wanted to do was see if we could get to a point where there was a definition or there was some description that we could all hang our hat on.
Yep.
So the first thing we did is we asked everybody in our membership what they called the people that they engage with. And we ended up with 48 descriptors.
That many.
Now you missed the first forum
where
those 48 descriptors ended up being a game of cards. And we had 50 companies in the room, senior managers and CEOs of the largest players in the industry. And they first of all had a briefing from a lawyer which explained to them the stuff that everybody knows, the matrix that says this is what an independent contractor should be doing, this is the legislation, this is what a labour hire worker should be doing, and this is what a direct employee should be doing. And these were clearly mapped out by the lawyer. And then we sent them off into 3 groups with three legal facilitators and handed them the pile of cards and said, okay, we want you to come back with 5 definitions or 5 descriptors that you're happy to work with.
Yep.
And of all the years I've been heading up industry associations, for me that was the most amazing morning of activity I have ever seen. And we had in the room contractor management companies, recruiters, we had payroll companies, we had insurers, we had lawyers, We had people who are responsible for standards and quality. We had a huge mix of people in the room. The groups were mixed quite deliberately, and they were sitting around the table for 2 hours, shuffling these cards around like they were at a poker game, trying to work out where they would end up and how those definitions would end up. And I just stood back and watched all this work being done. And I've, to be honest, never seen such interaction or such discussion or such heated argument and debate.
People clearly passionate about the industry.
And clearly surprised at the nuances in the words and the meanings.
Yep.
And we weren't coming up with a definition that says independent contractor is. What we were trying to do was work out all the different words that people use to describe the same thing. But the standout language that the lawyer had flagged was a risk, that the financial institutions that were in the room had flagged was a risk, the accountants, everybody else, was PAYG contractor. Because PAYG means employee, contractor does not always mean direct employee.
Yeah.
And so that particular descriptor was the one in my head that we wanted to...
It's an oxymoron, isn't it?
It's an oxymoron. It's the one we wanted to get rid of. But it was the one we had to fight the hardest to have the conversation about, because it's embedded in so many people's websites, in the way they describe themselves, in the way they report, all sorts of things. But it is actually the biggest risk to businesses in the sector, because it's what the tax office comes after when they're looking and reviewing. Because if everything's not in the right context, then you can be exposed. And so that first forum, we ended up with 5 headings. I can't even remember what they are now, but we ended up with 5 headings. We had some that were thrown out. We had some that people weren't. So we ended up with red, orange and green. Red we got rid of.
Yep.
Orange we had about 6, I think, that we still needed to debate. And then we had green ones that people were clearly very happy with.
Yep.
Professional contracting was the master header that everybody wanted. But that got thrown out in a working group further on, where professional can mean all sorts of things. And so people thought that was just too... I can't even describe what the word is, but they just didn't like it. Nobody in the working group liked it. And so what we did is we ended up with these 5 groups, but understanding that independent contracting is probably the overarching terminology.
Right.
And we took that away, and to my mind, that was probably where we were going to go for a little while. The people who attended the forum were happy then for our legal advisors, our accounting advisors, our insurance advisors, our standards advisors, and our HR advisors, which ITCRA's got a team like that, to sit down and workshop that and come up with what the next step was. And so that group sat in the room with what we came up with. They workshopped it for a whole day. And at the end of they were the ones who threw out professional contracting. Yep. And at the end of the day, they said, now we've got to go back and have another conversation about how we want to define these. Because in amongst the conversation had come some international perspectives. And remembering, particularly in white-collar professional contracting or white-collar professional placement and recruitment, it's very much a global marketplace. And so... we started to get this influence of what the international market was saying, and that's where the flex worker and flexi worker started to be thrown into the mix. So we'd run the first forum in April. When we walked away from this workshop with the advisors, I thought, no, we're not going to get to a second workshop. We won't get enough people. It was oversubscribed as well. You were there. Yep. And the second part of the conversation was then about, okay, so what are the legal implications, what are the insurance implications, and what are the actual definitions, the key indicators, and all of the bits that suit, and which ones of the terminology that people just won't let go of can we group together under another heading. So we've got a flex worker heading with a number of different descriptors underneath it. We've got labour hire contractor has stayed in the mix, and we've got independent contractor.
Yep.
And that's where we've ended up at the moment. That's gone out to the market. It's gone out to every single ITCRA member. We've had some feedback and some tweaking. And the next stage of this is to go with this now. We're redeveloping all our contract templates, all our advisory notes on work health and safety, all of the materials we provide to members are going to reference this language, and we're taking our first submission to both the opposition and the federal government to start having a look at whether we can get language in legislation changed.
Right, and what essentially will that mean to businesses and how they operate?
Well, what it'll mean is we're hoping, legislative change takes forever. I'm not for 1 minute saying that's going to happen tomorrow. But what we're hoping will happen is that when conversations about poor employment and poor management of workers who work on flexible work rates, and particularly some of the stuff that's come out of the labour hire inquiries around the horticultural area and whatever, that there is a clear understanding there's a separation. A contractor in a cleaning business earning $35 an hour cannot be expected to be treated the same way or be bound by the same set of legislation as a contractor in ICT earning $125 an hour.
Yep.
The parameters are too broad. And so the first step for us is to actually get people to understand that word contractor can mean so many different things and has so many different pulls and levers on it that you can't just use this overarching heading to lump anybody who's not working in what is known as traditional work. You can't lump them all into one space.
Yeah.
And that probably is, where we will start and where we have to start. But before we do that, we want to make sure we're all talking from the same language.
Yep.
From our recruiters and the clients of our recruiters, that we actually have contracts that are talking the same language.
Yep.
For the contractors and the recruiters, they're talking the same language. And then to the insurers and everybody else. At the moment, insurance policies for this sector are all labour hire insurance policies.
Yep.
That's the first thing we're determined to change. The second is looking at stuff like the payroll taxes, wording and language around various payroll tax acts.
And the word employee has some
and
confusion around that.
And the word, very much so, and the fact that if you were to talk to many of the ICT, in fact, there's been a survey that's been done in preparation for the RCSA conference around how people feel about the recruiters that they work for. I've submitted it out to the ICT market on behalf of the person running the survey who's doing the presentation because she wanted a comparison. And we had to change the survey and take employee out because the contractors do not see themselves as employees.
Yeah.
Contractors at that level, senior accountants, interim CEOs and executives who are contractors do not see themselves as employees. They are responsible, they employ themselves, they're self-engaged. And so taking that whole language out of there and making sure we understand when they are employees and when they're not. And at no point was this, somebody inferred after an article was published this week, somebody inferred that this is just the recruiters trying to avoid their responsibilities. Far from it. This is really about the recruiters responding to what the market wants and to what the clients want and to what the contractors want. And that is being very clear and concise in their language of how they describe the people they engage with.
Yep.
There are people that are their employees. There's no two ways about it. And they're identified clearly as that.
Yep. So, Julie, the next thing I'd like to touch on is just how this all has an impact on employment law with regard to entitlements and, the whole employee versus contractor thing. So can you explain a bit further what that all means?
Well, I think what we're trying to do is in the matrices that we're developing, clearly identify where those entitlements sit and which piece of the definitions and the piece of the language actually provides those entitlements. Whether and these documents that we're going to release, and they're not quite ready for release yet, and the language is still being reviewed. So I'm just being a bit cautious about it because I don't want it on record at the moment. But clearly there's a channel that is where people take responsibility for all their entitlements, and includes their superannuation. They pay their own workers' comp. They pay their insurances and everything else. And there's a group of contractors under the independent contractor heading, and that's what they do, and that's what they want to do. There's another group that might have that as their responsibility, but actually engage a third party to do it on their behalf. So that could be a payroll management company, it could be a contractor management company, it could be a recruiter who they pay to do that service. And there's also been some commentary of late around the fact that there are recruiters who do actually charge a fee to contractors to provide those services for them. What people don't understand is the contractors have made that decision. The contractor wants to be independent, but they don't want the day-to-day responsibility of delivering payments to super, to all the tax, to payroll tax in particular, to workers' comp and all the rest of it. So they engage a third party to do that for them. And so it's a service. It's not charging them a fee to get a job, it's a service. And these are the kind of anomalies that we want this program to separate out, because there's all this grey area that people get all very excited about when one person's been treated badly, suddenly they capture everybody in there. And it doesn't matter if people aren't getting their right employee entitlements when they're working at a 7-Eleven store. A person who's a postgraduate degree white collar professional and is not getting their right entitlements should be aware of that. They should be able to sort that out for themselves. There's quite a distinct difference between the two types of worker, and that's not any negative comment about any type of worker, but there are people who can negotiate and argue those things for themselves, and there are people who are vulnerable, which is the language we use, and who need support for that. And one of the aims of this program is to make sure that there is clarity, real clarity around what those entitlements are, what they look like, and more importantly, how they are managed.
And it sounds like already they're starting to get some more clear definitions around it. There's
the 3 columns in the matrices that have been accepted to date by the members, but we're just drafting the contracts to go with them. So if the contracts can work with the matrices, I'll be more than happy to have another conversation. But at the moment, the matrices are there, there's some language there, the contracts are with the lawyers being worked with at the moment. But I think they're the important things that need to be really articulated carefully before we start saying that this group of people are entitled to those. Everything at the end of the day hinges around the wording in contracts. Very much at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you call them a frangipani contractor. If the contract says that they are PAYG for whatever reason, immediately entitlements start to be looked at. And so the wording in the contracts is the key to all of this, and that's really what we want to nut this down to, and start to have the industry using similar contracts, so that there isn't the opportunity for people to fall through the cracks. That's one of the other, and it's not about collusion, it's not about control, it's about consistency, the right language, and not leaving these gaps for people to actually exploit, which does happen.
Yeah, okay, terrific. So, Julie, I really appreciate your time in coming in today to discuss these things, and I guess before we go, I'd like to know what the next steps are.
Yep, as I said earlier, the next steps are certainly coming up with some template documents that work for the members and for the industry at large, that can start to have the dialogue about why we need consistency in this language. Secondly, to develop these position statements around the value of the contracting workforce. One of the key questions that we've been asked in meetings with both government and opposition is, what is the value of the white-collar contracting space to the economy? So the flow on from this is that with engagement of more companies and more members, we'll be able to get a sense of that. But I think most importantly for me is the real outcome is that we want to continue this dialogue, so that the language we use, the models we present in Australia, which has one of the most exciting, expansive, flexible workforces in terms of the various ways people can engage. What we want to do is expand this and be able to take some leadership in a global sense and have these conversations globally. Our next forum in November is very much going to be looking at the global picture, and we're we aim to bring in an overseas lawyer to talk about Asia and UK, and that'll either be November or March. We're not sure yet, depending on what the contracts look like, whether we're going to have a forum to actually not educate, because I think it's more about engaging people in discussion, as we did with the first forum, and get people to say, yep, this will work in my business, or no, these pieces won't, and send it back for more review. It is a constant work in progress.
Yep.
But most importantly, it drives into everything we do. The People and Talent Management Standard, our iSafe Work Health and Safety program, all of our certification and education, every piece of that work will be modified to go with what we're getting out of these forums.
Yeah, terrific. And I guess with something as complex as what we're discussing here, it's never going to happen overnight, is it, that we get these sort of...
And I've been heading up this industry sector through 2 associations now for almost 20 years, heaven forbid. And in that time, we have fought consistently to try and get language changes and definition and more consistency around how the industry is viewed and described. We're a long way from getting that done. But unless we continue to put the messages out there, unless we've got some consistency within the industry, you can't have a voice. And that was my concern. When the labour hire inquiry started, I was asked 3 questions by a commissioner, and 2 of them I honestly couldn't answer hand on heart, because I knew that 5 members at any one point in time would have a different point of view. I need to consolidate that point of view and talk on behalf of the members and have them coming with me, not just me speaking on what I think is the right answer.
Yep, and can I just say, Julie, I think you're doing a terrific job
Thank
with
you.
that. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.